Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining me. We are going to try to finish up Psalm 28. Not Psalm 28, Psalm 24 today. We finished with verse 5 last time, which was maybe not the best place to finish because verse 6 actually belongs with the previous section of the psalm describing which human beings can enter the temple. So we'll read verse 6 and then finish the psalm up. Just to begin with verse 6. Ze dor derosho Mevak She, Vaneka Yaakov, Selah. Go ahead, pronounce that verse out loud and see how much you can translate. Okay, so the first clause is pretty easy. Ze means this, and dor means generation. It's always easy when a Hebrew word sounds so much like an English word. You make up a random association and remember it that way. And then the word here is darash, which means to seek. The parentheses are just something BibleWorks puts in whenever there's a Ketiv Kareh, and I've kept the Ketiv, what's written here. Now the Kareh uses the expected form of the 3ms suffix with a chirek, but it obviously means the same thing. You can tell that this is a Kal active participle because of the cholim beginning the root. It's the coattail form. So this is the generation seeking him. So what role verse 6 plays is verses 3 through 5 are all individually focused. Which individuals can enter the temple? Verse 6 happily expands this focus to include a whole generation of people who have met the temple requirements and are eager to go in and worship the Lord. So second clause, mevak she, you get a parallel participle with darash. Bakash means to seek. Obviously, the mem out front tells you it's a participle, and the vocal shava tells you it's a PL participle. Normally, you'd get a doubled middle root letter in the PL, but you'll perhaps remember the coal mine rule. If you don't remember it, type in animated Hebrew to YouTube. There's a series of videos by a friend of mine at a first-year level teaching Hebrew that are really superb and just great to review. He will explain that rule for you. But basically, the letters Kof, Vav, Lamed, Mem, Yod, and Nun. When you're in a situation with those 6 letters, when you would normally double them, but there is only a only a shava underneath, they do not double. The shava is not considered strong enough to double the letter, so you just skip that rule. So there's no doubling there, but it's still a PL participle. Now, there's a little bit of an issue in the second clause. You may have had a little bit of difficulty translating it. Literally, it's just seek those seeking your face, Jacob, which doesn't read very well. Jacob might look like a vocative, but it's a little bit clumsy. If you check BHS, there's a text critical issue here. If you look at the text critical notes in BHS, about 5 lines down, you'll notice for note 6b that the Septuagint omits the suffix, but that a number of witnesses add Elohe, that seek the face of the God of Jacob, which would make sense. That may be correct. Regardless of which reading is original, the verse still makes sense. So the point to verse 6 is to expand how many human beings are getting into the temple. The last part of the psalm shows not individual human beings entering the temple, but God himself. God himself shows up in worship. It's really quite amazing. Interestingly, in verses 3 through 6, the potential barrier to human beings getting into the temple is moral. People have to be innocent of hands and clean of heart to get in. The potential barrier to God entering the temple obviously isn't moral. It's that the temple is too small to fit him. So verses 7 and 8, Se'u sha'arim rashekem, vehina se'u pitche olam, Veyavo melech hakavod. There's a really nice rhyme with the repeating, assonance, with the repeating seen and sheen sounds in verse 7. And verse 8, Mi ze melech hakavod, Adonai azuz vegibor, Adonai gibor milchama. So, pause the video, pronounce verses 7 and 8 out loud, see how much you can translate. So, verse 7, Se'u, you may hopefully recognize this as a kal, masculine plural imperative from nasa, and the nun has dropped off, as it often will with this verb. So se'u is just lift up. Sha'arim means gates, but it's a vocative, it's direct address here. Lift up, O gates, rashechem, your heads. And then the parallel clause, we get nasa again, but we get a nifal imperative. You know it's nifal because the first root letter is doubled. And you know it's an imperative because you have a hey out front. That hey with a chirek can't be a hiphil because you don't have any other signs of the hiphil. You have an I vowel, doubled first root letter, and then a long A vowel under the first root letter, which are all the characteristics of the nifal in the imperative, in imperfect and the imperative forms. So from lift up to be lifted up, Pitchei Olam, doors of ancientness, doors of eternity, or ancient doors, something like that. And last clause, Veyavo, and he shall come in, the King of Glory, and the King of Glory may come in. You'll notice that the verb here is a veyiktol, a non-consecutive vav on an imperfect verb, which it's not a verb form I understand very well, frankly. The consecutive vav imperfect, the vayiktil form, pretty consistently shows narrative past tense. For the most part in poetry, this verb form seems to show a result, and that makes good sense here. The lifting up happens with the result that the King of Glory can come in. So the temple gates, which would have been so impressive to Israelite worshippers, have to strain to admit this great God, this transcendent God. Verse 8, mi zeh, mi means who, and zeh is not this here, it's used as an emphatic. If you look up the other places zeh goes with me, it tends to get used in questions not so much requesting information as expressing a tone of awe. The question obviously in verse 8 is rhetorical. It's spoken in awe of this King of Glory, the Melech HaKavod. Who is this King of Glory? It's Yahweh, the covenant God. Azuz ve'gibor. Azuz is an adjective, it means strong, and then gibor means something like... Gibor in Hebrew is what we mean when we talk about a cage fighter or a Navy SEAL or a Marine or something like that. Someone strong and powerful in battle. Yahweh strong and mighty. And then the last clause, Yahweh Gibor Milchama, Yahweh mighty of battle, a construct phrase, obviously mighty in battle. So the triumphant king from verses 1 and 2, who founded the world and completely orders all creation, he enters as that mighty hero. And this is Yahweh, it's the covenant God. It's the God who fights on your behalf. And creation and the temple itself can barely hold him. It's only, I take there to be some level of exaggeration here. We all remember in 1 Kings 8, Solomon prays that heaven and earth can't contain you, how much less this building I've made. And yet God in his infinity condescends to meet with his people in worship. And it's not, and more specifically, it's the God of glory, the God who's a powerful warrior, and it's the covenant God, the God who keeps covenant with you, who fights on your behalf. God levels the massive energies of heaven to fight on your behalf and save you, and he comes personally to worship. That's a huge motivation to keep the requirements of verses 3 through 5. What a wonderful motivation to keep your hands clean and your heart pure, because you get to meet with this God. And even more interestingly, verses 9 and 10 repeat word for word exactly what verses 7 and 8 say. Why do they do that? Well, it's not hard to hear the liturgical chant in the background. You can hear the Israelites singing these verses, and they repeat it. In repeating it, the psalm is obviously not giving us any new information. It's recreating the context of original worship so that we can enter in. So that even if you're an ancient Israelite and maybe you're living far away from the temple, maybe you're living in exile, who knows? There's a little echo of that original worship of people entering the temple and then God himself coming that you get to enter into as you hear this echoing, repeated chant. You can say it too. The psalm doesn't exclude you from the worship, in other words. So the beautiful thing about Psalm 24 is it's getting two groups of people into the temple. Human beings who might morally disqualify themselves, and God who is just so great, he has to condescend and humble himself to meet with us. But he does. You're supposed to feel God's presence in verse 8. Who is this King of Glory? This odd question that can't believe that God himself shows up. And yet he does. Okay, that's Psalm 24. In a couple days, I want to look at a little bit of a couple verses about seeing God's face, and then we'll go on to Psalm 25. Thanks, anyone. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. Thanks so much. Bye for now.